You can't ask for two greater nations in the world. Let's stick together and please get the message to President Trump. This is not a good idea for both countries.
All 13 of Canada's provincial and territorial leaders are descending on Washington for a rare joint trip. They're hoping to convince U.S. officials not to impose tariffs on any Canadian goods, including steel and aluminum. The CBC's Katie Simpson is following the Premier's moves in D.C. Hey there, Katie. Can you bring us up to speed on the Premier's efforts today?
Basically, it's an all-out effort to try and get face time with influential Americans, whether they're lawmakers, they're business leaders, or anyone that might have any sort of insight into what it might take to get Donald Trump to change his mind, which at this point, there is nothing to suggest that Donald Trump wants to change his mind or is really open to that conversation. But again, we'll see where things go, because things in this moment in Washington, D.C. are a little unpredictable. We've seen from Francois Legault, Quebec's premier. He met with home builders today in Washington, D.C. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is in town. Everyone's in town, but Doug Ford sort of had one of the larger events today. He was hosted by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Inside the room, it was sort of preaching to the choir. There were a lot of Canadians in the room. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is an incredibly influential organization. It's very anti-tariff, is very much it wants to see any sort of impediment to business sort of pushed aside. But what we asked, Premier Ford, in this moment, given how Donald Trump has really just hardened his position on tariffs with the threats that he's made, how is it that Canada's premiers, how are they going to actually be able to get to the people that influence Trump and really try and see if any minds can be changed? And Doug Ford seemed to admit that, it is a daunting task, but they've got to at least try.
President Trump is probably one of the best negotiators in the world. This is his area of expertise, but we need to sit down. And it's not always just the president. He has great advisors. He has very important key allies that sit in the Senate and sit in the Congress that he needs their support. So we're going to continue communicating our message about the AMCAN fortress and just working the room, working Washington.
So that is really what the premiers are going to be doing tomorrow. They are doing it now. They're going to be doing it tomorrow. They are meeting with some influential Republican senators up on Capitol Hill. And really, it's just trying to get as much face time as they can with anyone who has a voice that might sort of put pressure on the Trump administration to try and change course. That is going to be ramping up tomorrow. As we know, a senior Canadian government source telling my colleague Kate McKenna that Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc will be actually meeting with Howard Lutnick tomorrow. He is the soon-to-be Secretary of Commerce, and he is a very big proponent of tariffs. You'll remember when the whole tariff threat was going down a couple weekends ago, it was Howard Lutnick that called Dom LeBlanc to say, hey, officially this is coming. What I am told by a senior Canadian government source is that, no one's necessarily expecting a breakthrough in this moment. These are the kinds of conversations that sort of build over time because Canada is trying to get to a landing zone where there are no tariffs. These conversations are part of that strategy. However, it is what I am told, it is the opinion of senior officials in Ottawa that even if the first tariff deadline is March 4th, that perhaps Donald Trump isn't going to make up his mind about tariffs until March 3rd. So all of these conversations leading up to that deadline, they hope can add up and sort of make Canada's case.
Yeah, and we probably should note, too, Katie, some controversy about the fact that Doug Ford is there. He's there as the head of the Council of the Federation, but of course he's also on the campaign trail. Some of his political opponents say it's not appropriate for him to be in Washington, D.C. We'll talk more about that in the Power Panel later in the show. But right now, are there any signs the White House is receptive to the Canadian message?
This is the big question, right? How do you get Donald Trump to sort of soften his position when it's something that he campaigned on, when he declared himself the tariff man and said tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language? All of his language around tariffs is only intensified since he became president. And of course, we have seen the threats that he has actually turned into executive orders. Everything is on pause right now. Everything sort of remains hanging over Canada. But there is is one consultant who was he is a Canadian American dual citizen, but his business is based in the United States, and he sort of walked us through sort of this moment, and that it sort of is bleak in terms of trying to, at least right now, get through to the president and try and change his mind, and that perhaps there are going to be some very difficult times to come before the president changes his mind, if that's even possible.
You start seeing stock markets go down, when you start seeing vehicle plants close, when you start seeing the price of beef go up, when you start seeing the price of energy go up, that is what will get through to President Trump. When his allies on Capitol Hill call and say, why are we doing this? Why is Canada taking a hit like this? Unfortunately, President Trump has to touch the hot stove before he realizes how valuable and integrated this relationship is and begins to take a different course.
I believe that is something sort of similar to the fool around and find out sort of strategy. That basically is essentially what that argument is right there, that it's going to take some results that sort of hurt either the stock market, the American economy, the jobs market, makes lives more expensive, that perhaps those could be things that weigh on President Trump. Or honestly, Catherine, really, who knows? Like, really.
There's 2025 in a nutshell. Really, who knows?
Will there be tariffs? Who knows? Will there not be tariffs? Who knows? It's not, this is not a moment of predictability.
Indeed, but always great, predictably great to have you on the program and to get to talk to you, Katie.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, the CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington. Canada's premiers are in Washington on their own mission to convince the U.S. government to back down on tariffs.
These tariffs, in our opinion, a lot of people's opinion, is just going to hurt Americans and it's going to hurt Canadians. We don't want to do that. We just have to get our message out about we're stronger together. That's the message we want to deliver to the American people and to the elected officials down here.
But is that message actually being heard by its target audience? The Power Panel is back. Kate Harrison, Michelle Cadario, Andrew Thompson, and Emily Nicolas. Emily, I'm going to start with you. I mean, what is the best case scenario to come out of the premiers heading down there? Nobody thinks Donald Trump's going to go, all right, you got me. Bye-bye tariffs. What's the end game?
I think the end game is to gain a certain level of support inside the Republican Party and inside the American political class. We've been saying that Canada is stronger with the U.S. We've been saying that Donald Trump is at risk of hurting his own people. The reality is that he is hurting his own people in other ways. When you see the drastic cuts he is doing in the federal government, including things in education, in healthcare, in social services, he is already hurting Americans in other ways, and he doesn't seem to care that much until now. And so I'm not sure that's the best argument. I do think, however, that he might care if some people in his circles start to care. So that's why Justin Trudeau's meeting with J.D. Vance in Europe might actually be interesting, given how Ohio might be affected by some of the policies that are put forward, and that this is where the vice president is coming from. And so you need to have a sense of who's actually having the ear of Donald Trump. And the problem is that is very unclear how much Donald Trump is listening to anyone beyond a very close circle or even beyond Elon Musk at this point. I do think, however, that there is going to be a lot of resistance to a lot of different policies that that Donald Trump has put forward by the American public itself. And we need to understand as well that we're just one of 25 different emergencies that the American public are dealing with. And that I think our message would be stronger if, beyond the meetings that we're having that are very targeted with the different industry people, which are really important, we also understand that we're one of 25 things that the Americans are worried about when it comes to the leadership of their own government. There's a lot of people who voted for Trump who are worried about how fast Donald Trump is moving in the direction of reforms that they didn't see coming as swiftly.
Yep.
And so that is perhaps the target at which we can aim. But very much it's going to be about the American public itself making Donald Trump's presidency uncomfortable. And we're not necessarily going to be the top file for any of those people, but we might be among those files, and we need to make sure that we're in solidarity with all of those causes that the American public is about to embrace as well.
Yeah, and I mean, to that point, there was an interesting discussion about who was in the room today when Ontario's Doug Ford was speaking. According to reporters who were there, it was primarily Canadians. Now, he does have other events, as do the other premiers, with lawmakers. I know he's got a big event coming up with Kevin Cramer as well, but it sort of speaks to this challenge of getting Americans to pay attention. Andrew, I would ask you, the premiers are not all on exactly the same page about what Canada should do when it comes to, for instance, counter tariffs, or whether oil and gas should be part of, threats, essentially, counter threats that the Americans would face. So what challenge does that pose when you have them all down there, but they're not quite singing from the same songbook?
They sound a lot better. It's a lot more harmonious than what we were hearing a few weeks ago.
True.
And so I do think that is one of the advantages of having them all there, is to present as much of a united front as we can to the Americans, letting them know, look, yeah, there's no ability to divide and conquer us, which did seem very much the case 2 or 3 weeks ago, as there was this divide of Moe and Smith off on their not so quiet diplomacy piece. Doug Ford's turning off the power. Everyone's off wildly, pursuing their own agendas here. So they've been able to at least to paper over that, and I think they present to the Americans this sense that, look, we are united. We're all in this for the same reasons. The public relations aspect of it, Ford's speech to the chamber today, I don't know. I mean, you're not going to ever get much more than a Canadian interested audience at those things. The question is what the other meetings are that they're picking up. What intel do they hear as they're meeting with folks? And then after that, how do they use their own networks to deploy and use that to build a stronger coalition and a stronger argument? I do think Emily's right that part of what is needing to be shown as a message is that, look, there's a lot of chaos going on in the U.S. There are a lot of crises. This doesn't need to be one of them. And so both piling on to show that this is causing unnecessary pain and frustration and angst and, consternation among Americans, I think is an important part of demonstrating. Look, one way to kind of calm that down is just let's get the leave the economic stuff off to the side. Do whatever you're going to do with firing all your civil service, shutting down all your departments, letting your food rot in the ports rather than go off to poor people in other countries. That's a domestic consideration for them to pursue. I say that very kind of tongue in cheek because obviously all of that's a bad idea. But, that's the kind of piece that we've got to put to the Americans, which is, you've got 99 problems. We don't need to be one of them.
Michelle, does the federal government need this kind of response from the premiers, given the strange political situation we find ourselves in federally? We're not going to have the same prime minister in a matter of weeks. Is it helpful to have the premier sort of leading a branch of this charge?
I think it's always helpful, and it certainly was the Team Canada approach. When the first time that Mr. Trump was in, because the premiers, what the premiers can do is talk more locally to the governors, to the different senators, about the very specifics of what goes back and forth between certain provinces, right? Like you look at how Senator Grassley, on the whole bourbon issue, he reacted and he was out there publicly asking for an exemption on agricultural products because it was going to hurt his state. And, I think that the premiers are excellent people to be able to say that. I think the more voices, the better, whether it's from our business community, from, family to family across the border, the whole thing. And, in terms of Mr. Ford, let's just all remember he's in the middle of an election campaign, so he's quite happy to be talking to Canadians, right? And he's probably hoping that most of them live in Ontario.
I don't know how many votes he's... Well, I mean, this leads to an interesting question, Kate, and I know it's perhaps a bit of an uncomfortable one, but Doug Ford is being criticized by his political opponents on the campaign trail, Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie saying this violates the Caretaker Convention. He shouldn't be down there in this role. He's the leader of the Council of the Federation right now. But there's no question he is using what is happening in the United States to make the case for himself, to get a political bump. Is this a bridge too far, being at the front end of this?
I really don't think so, because the alternative is sitting on your hands and hoping that Trump's tariffs pass you by, or being seen to be, not standing up for industries?
You could say, I'm going to sit this one out because right now I'm trying to get my message to the people of Ontario, I suppose.
I don't think Ontarians would buy that. I think they would say, no, you're our elected leader. We expect you to defend our industries. We expect you to stand up for us. And Doug Ford is doing that. The whole kind of premise of this election was that he was going to be the one to try and manage the province through these threats, and not showing up at key moments like this, I think, would really undermine his value proposition and message to voters right now. So I think that he's right to focus on this and keep on the gas on the DC question. I will just say, though, it would be helpful if the premiers also found time to talk about internal trade, not just have the conversation about the relationship with the U.S., because a lot of the challenges that we have could be resolved around that Premier Council of the Federation table on the internal trade issue, not just U.S.
I do want to find time for another quick go-around here, but I thought it was interesting, Michelle. You were nodding there. You actually think Doug Ford's...
I very much publicly agree with Kate on both of those points. I think that I think Doug Ford would be harshly criticized for sitting something out. You can criticize him for calling the election campaign or not, which I think is fair ball in the midst of all of this. But absolutely, he has got to be there. Ontario is like 40% of our economy. He absolutely has to be there. And her other point about the internal trade, hallelujah, absolutely. If this doesn't get something going, gosh, I have no idea whatever will.
Yeah, Emily, do you buy that on internal trade? I mean, we had Anita Anand, who's in charge of the file federally, although these are all provincial regulations, I suppose, territorial regulations. Do you believe that Canada can make moves on tearing down some of these barriers as quickly as this initial groundswell of optimism suggests?
I mean, we can make moves, but we need to understand what the bigger goal is. I was reading the economist Paul Krugman, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, comparing what Donald Trump is doing to Canada, using the issue of trade and tariff to the excuse of weapon of mass destruction to invade Iraq, in a sense that the goal is to redraw the relationship to, quote unquote, get a better deal, have access to our critical mineral, maybe even our water. And right now we're having a conversation about the tariff and going to DC, trying to negotiate the fact that the tariff would be bad for the Americans. But I do think that Donald Trump is more ambitious than that. And we need to also, if we don't believe that, we need to look at what he just said, I think believe just today or yesterday about the Ukraine, and saying as well that maybe one day the Ukraine could be Russian, and that if the Ukrainian people are going to benefit from U.S. aid, they need to also give the Americans more access to their critical mineral and their resources, and that he's going to be looking to get a payback from Ukraine because of the Americans, the help that the Americans have been giving. And so that tells us something about his mindset. And I very much disagree with the people saying that he doesn't have a logic. He has a logic, and it's perhaps more easy for us to understand when we look at things he's been saying about Ukraine about Gaza. But I think this disbelief is very much not helping. And we need to understand that if the tariff thing or the commercial balance or imbalance is a pretext, then we need to make sure that we're protecting Canadian sovereignty. And I'm myself reassured by the fact that the Prime Minister, and he was caught in a hot mic during the weekend, he seems to get it. And I think that there's a lot of people in Ottawa who seem to get it, even though they cannot necessarily say it openly. But at least that tells me that we have still a Canadian leadership class that has a little bit of a sense of what's happening right now. And I think to me that is reassuring, is that if some of us are still in disbelief, at least the people who are making decisions, a part of them actually caught up on what level of ambition Donald Trump actually has.
Andrew, I guess the question is, though, to what end, right? Like, let's say we all accept that he's got a real, he's got a thing for us, Canada, but not in a good way. I interviewed David McGuinty on the House, the radio program that I host, and was asking him, like, if this is a real threat, like, where is the plan? And he says this just isn't serious. That was his response to me. But, like, let's imagine that you're saying, okay, there is something serious here. What would you even do about it at this point, beyond what is already being done to shore us up economically?
Right. So, I mean, there's a few things that we really need to take a look at here. I mean, if you read what his economic advisors were suggesting leading into the campaign, one of the big issues that Americans are fixated with is their fact that their strong dollar is actually driving so much of their, the import mentality into the U.S. I mean, there are Americans who are fixated on the fact that Canadians are selling at a discount because of our dollar difference into the Americans. And the 25% tariff largely wipes that out. It's a way to bring the currencies back to par. That's a problem. I mean, that is something that I think as Canadians we really need to think about. That is it really so bad that we could not be competitive with a dollar at par? There are structural issues we're going to have to tackle. I think it's a lot bigger than whether or not we've got interprovincial free trade agreements in place. We've got to talk about the industrial strategy for the country that's been largely absent for the last decade. We've got to talk about what needs to be in place to move beyond being the petro state that Stephen Harper thought we were. How do we make sure that we've got a truly functioning economy that can work in this kind of environment? That's one of the things they're trying to deal with is this currency correction. Second piece, yeah, they do want to go back and re-litigate all of the pieces that they lost in the last NAFTA agreement. That's going to be supply management. It's going to be access to telcos. It's going to be access to the airline industry. It's going to be, us harmonizing our banking regulations with theirs so their banks can come up here and compete. All of those pieces, we know what it is, and maybe Emily's right. Maybe it's also water. So those pieces we've got to really think about, and that is going to require a lot more effort on the part of the premiers, a lot more effort on the part of our business community to really knuckle down and figure out what it is we need to do as Canadians to live within that environment. I also do want to say, though, I agree with Emily in her point about the Europeans, that this is an area that we have largely neglected, that we have not, we have decided for whatever reason to throw our lot entirely in with the Americans. And there are a lot of levers available to us to think about what else we do with the Europeans. Defense spending is one of them. If we're about to pump $40 billion more into our defense spending to bring ourselves up to our NATO target, where is that money going? Most of our Ukraine aid went to the U.S. to buy weapons for them to ship to, to Ukraine. Is there something more we can be doing on that front with, South Korea for subs, with Northern European partners for airplanes? We've got to think about how we balance out some of that in a way that makes sense for Canada.
Yeah, and interesting questions too about use in our own, building up our own domestic industries or using it as a bargaining chip with the United States. So much to think about. Very grateful to the whole Power panel for talking us through it today. Thank you very much, Emily Nicolas, Andrew Thompson, Michelle Caderio, and Kate Harrison.